Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It actually started with a class, I think it was around 2004, 2005. I started studying Al-Kafi with one of my teachers, Shaykh Ahmadi, who's now on the ITI team. And it was a great experience because I was able to ask questions of him kind of with no holds barred. Dumb questions, playing devil's advocate, just fundamental questions of, questioning everything and it was easy to do because it was safe to do because I had him as an anchor. So no matter what I asked, he would deal with the questions and would come away with a greater understanding. What happened? I remember the conversation in one class. We were going through this, and I realized that this is great. We should package this, bottle this, and this is what people need to have a situation like this where they can experience a hadith and then be able to ask questions and have all everything about the hadith answered for them. So I said, someone should do this. And I remember he looked back and he's like, why don't you do it? Why don't you start? And so that was the first time I realized that it's something that's doable. It's not something that's somebody out there has to do, or some great scholar has to do. Right? It could start as something simpler and grow. So I put a proposal together. We kind of went back and forth trying to develop the idea and how the logistics of it will happen. And then we thought, it's important to see if anyone else is doing something like this, approaching a hadith to try to write a commentary to translate them. So I went to all the different institutions in Qom with this proposal that we had developed, and I went to Darul Hadith, which is this big organization it was actually working on Al-Kafi, but in a different way. They had a project with something like 40 people, a huge budget, and their goal was to take all of the manuscripts of Al-Kafi, something like 60 manuscripts that they had found within Iran and Iraq and other places, and to come up with kind of the best version of Al-Kafi, taking into account all those manuscripts and the variations and dots here and there and different words and all these different things. And so they were towards the end of their project, so we were hoping that we could kind of piggyback off of them, take their best version of Al-Kafi, and then start from there. So that's what's happened. Their final kind of the edition that they came up with is this 15-volume copy of Al-Kafi, and so we've used their text and then taken that text and then written our commentary based on that. I went to the Hawza, the head of the Hawza, and just all different organizations, some of the Maraja as well, and presented the idea and asked them if they know of anything that's happening like this, whether they have any comments or what things we should look out for, and make sure that we pay attention to as we go through this project and stuff like that. And so with all that, then we decided to start, so we set up about a year before I left Qom. We set up an office, kind of got all the books, the library that we needed, computers and everything, set everything up, and then we started working. The first day we worked, I remember it was a total disaster because my idea was I had this idealistic view that I could get a room full of top-notch scholars, kind of put a hadith before them, and then each person would, in turn, kind of very, in a very diplomatic way or in a very professional way, kind of, offer his input on his particular expertise on that hadith. What happened was it was a free for all because everyone has strong opinions, well-founded opinions. They spent a lifetime developing this whole kind of methodology and the body of knowledge that they have. And we spent the whole entire first day talking about the first word of the first hadith, and I realized that this isn't going to work. So then then we thought, okay, let's redesign how we work and kind of the workflow, and so we decided on a more of a assembly line way of working, where we would pass the hadith to the first person with all of my questions, the devil's advocate type questions, and let him do his work on it. Then take all of his comments, all of his research, and then pass it on to the second person, and then let him respond, add. That way, each person is in their own kind of within certain restrictions, and then they have time to think and research and then respond. And so that's how we work now. It goes through several people. Kind of the workflow. It starts out with me sitting down with the text, and I'll read the hadith and kind of think about put myself in the shoes of our prospective audience, right? Educated, curious, just interested people, interested Muslims who are looking at this hadith and trying to figure out what the Imam or the Prophet is trying to tell them. And so often you read a hadith and you come up with all sorts of questions. If you have some prior knowledge of the Quran, you see there seems to be a contradiction between something I know from the Quran and this hadith, or some other teaching in this hadith, or my common sense or any kind of experience in this hadith. And so I'd write all those questions down, pass it on to the first scholar, Shaykh Ha'iri, and he would take those questions and then his own questions and everything and go through all of the commentaries that have been written on Al-Kafi, and fill a notebook with everything he could find that was relevant to that hadith. Those notebooks now, like to date, I think he's on number 11, like huge binders of all handwritten notes. So he would do all of his work. Then we take his notebooks, pass it on to the second person, Shaykh Ahmadi. He would sit down with me again, and we discuss the hadith itself in light of all of Shaykh Ha'iri's research, and that's kind of, I guess the result of that discussion would be this final commentary, the Arabic commentary. So we choose what things were relevant, what things needed to be said, how should they be stated, or how should the arguments be presented. Once we had that kind of rough draft of an Arabic commentary ready, we'd pass it on to a third person, Shaykh Neeli. And he would sit down kind of on his own time, and he would again kind of critique, criticize, break down, offer new explanations for all the stuff that we had written. And then we take all of his notes and then go back and have another discussion and try to see which of his criticisms were relevant, where are weaknesses, and then fix up the Arabic commentary until we came up with an Arabic commentary that we were satisfied with. That was the end of that first leg of work, where we had an Arabic commentary done. That Arabic commentary, the intended purpose is to help a translator, kind of give him all the tools he would need to write a commentary on Al-Kafi, or to translate Al-Kafi. It wasn't intended, we didn't write it in a way that it's intended for kind of consumption by non-specialist readers, even in Arabic. So then I would sit down with that final Arabic commentary. I would sit down with it and translate the text based on the research we did, about the vocabulary, the diction, and grammar, and those sorts of things, the literary aspects of the text. And then I would choose those points from the Arabic commentary that were relevant for our English-speaking audience, and then really rewrite the commentary in a way that was relevant. That was just the first step, and then it would have to go through editing processes. We had content editors. Sayyid Suleiman would go through the content of it, and then he would sometimes completely tear apart the things that we had written, and then we'd have to go back to the Arabic commentary, rework things, and then retranslate, and then go back. So several times things would sometimes get turned over when you're in the heat of a discussion and you're kind of engrossed in a hadith. There's a tendency to get tunnel vision where you forget about other things that you should be thinking about. So it's good to have someone else come in who's not part of the conversation, and then see what's strong and what's weak, and they can sometimes add something that'll completely revolutionize the way you think about a particular thought or hadith. So the process from start to finish, it's not something I can define. It depended, because we have some hadith that are 2 words. It's just a subject and predicate, and that's it. The sanad itself, the chain of transmitters, might be like 5 times as long as the actual hadith, because the hadith is just 2 words. And then we have a hadith that are literally pages long. So like in the 36 hadith from the book of Intellect and Foolishness, one of those hadith is as long as all the other ones combined. So there's no way to kind of put a figure that way. But the entire book, I would say, like within a year to a year and a half, the whole process took place. It was taking us longer to actually publish the book, because we hadn't decided to actually publish them as in this particular format. We were thinking of waiting until we had more books translated and everything written before we published it as a set. So it's taken us, it's about 6 years since we started work till now when we're publishing. But the book could have been ready within 2 years maybe. Then the editing, so the editing process, part of it was the content of the book that had to be edited. But then there are also just the finer aspects of stylistic editing and usage and stuff like that. So we also had a professional editor go through the text with us for those aspects as well. And then of course the design and layout and all that stuff took a long time as well. So there are a lot of different aspects to putting the book together. With Nudba, we did involve non-Muslims, one non-Muslim as well. I went back to one of my English teachers from high school, my honors English teacher from 11th grade. And he was someone he actually got me started in writing. He was the first person I think who gave me confidence in my ability to write. Until then, I'd always been a math and science person. And I'd pigeonholed myself in those particular fields. And I remember I wrote something one time, and he was a very kind of expressive person, and I remember he read it and he just closed his eyes like this and said, "Rizwan, that's poetry." And I remember that I had this feeling of joy just from that comment of his. And I met him again last year after so many years. It's been, I don't know, more than a decade since I took his class, but I told him how much that one comment had affected me, and he was really moved by that. So anyway, I gave a nudba to him to read through it as a kind of a person who's distant from everything, the content and the whole genre and everything. And so he gave some really interesting comments and helpful comments to make the text more accessible. Because one of the goals is to make the text so it shouldn't be a text that only a specialist can approach. Otherwise, there's not much point in having this at all. A specialist should be able to access the original Arabic commentaries that are out there. This is the audience here is a non-specialist audience. People who have the intelligence and have the curiosity and all those things that are necessary to understand these things, but they don't have the technical skills. They don't have Arabic. They don't have the knowledge of the jargon that goes into these intellectual discussions and stuff like that. One thing that makes ITI unique is the structure itself. When we started out, very quickly I realized that this is an unprecedented sort of effort, because traditionally, even within the Islamic world, the way these kinds of things happen, research projects happen, it's generally a single person, a single scholar who will work on a project, on a text, on a book, whatever that is. Or if it's a team effort, it's usually going to be a scholar, like a high-level teacher with his students. And that also happens in two ways. There's one time when the scholar simply prepares his information and then presents it as a class. And because the Hawza is such an interactive type of a educational system, he'll present, and then the students they'll have their own preparation, and then they'll object and critique what he's doing, and through that process he refines his work until he's happy with it as a book. Or it happens like a team project, but even there it's like a high-level scholar with his students working together as a team. Like Allama Majlisi, for instance, he reportedly that's how Bihar al-Anwar came to be, that he was working with a team of researchers, and together they developed this. With ITI, we flipped the whole paradigm, because now we have the common thread here is the student, myself, and I'm now tapping into my teachers, and bringing them together, and then we're working. So we turned the whole paradigm on its head. It works, I think, because these particular scholars are extremely humble, and they understand kind of they understand the need, and they understand what needs to guide our efforts is whatever insight I can bring. Meaning, like, there's a lot can be said about something, about a particular topic, but not all of that can be said is necessarily relevant to a particular audience. So you need someone to kind of speak from the audience's perspective and ask the right questions and focus things in a way that all of that information, all of that knowledge can be presented in a way so the right questions can be asked, the right answers can be offered that's going to be relevant for a particular audience. And that's one of the roles that I play. And so they're extremely, despite the fact they're extremely knowledgeable, some of them are they're mujtahids, and they have years of experience in many different areas, teaching, writing, researching, but they're willing to kind of put all that aside and let me take the lead, and then help and kind of offer their services, as it were, in a focused way. So one other thing that makes it unique is the kind of the way the translation itself works. Because usually when you have a translation effort, it's just the translator himself and the text, and it's whatever the translator understands from the original text, that's what gets transferred into the receptor language from the original language, and that's a deficient system, or it's a system that's dependent on the level of the translator himself. So it depends how much he's able to understand from the original text, how well he understands that, and then how well he's able to communicate that into the language he's translating to. Here, what we've done is kind of endowed the translator, fortified the translator with multiple minds, multiple levels of experience. So I, for instance, as a translator now, it's not just me and how much I understand from the text. Now I have so many people I can draw from and say, well, what do you understand from the text, and how can we let's challenge each other, and let's refine that understanding. And the goal is to try to understand from the text what the Imam or the Prophet's original audience would have understood, not only content-wise, but also to the extent that we can, the literary aspects as well. Right? Sometimes the hadith are extremely beautiful, and they're purposely kind of there's imagery and all sorts of literary devices that are being used. So we want to make sure we understand all that properly, and then to the extent that we can, transfer that and translate that into English. So it's kind of the translator is now a super translator, like a translator who's not just using one mind, but now multiple minds to understand. And then on the translation side, on the receptor side, it's just one person again. But I think that the limiting factor generally tends to be the level of understanding of the original language. One of the problems that we often have with translation is a deficiency of one of the languages, right? So you have a person who isn't understands the Arabic very well, for instance, maybe able to really understand that well and analyze it well in Arabic or in some other language, but then he's not able to communicate that effectively into English. Or you have someone who has outstanding English literary skills, but he's not able to understand fully from the Arabic. And both of those are going to, you have to have that the full kind of arc from source language to receptor language to have a proper translation. So here we've, on the receptor side, I have whatever skills I have, but then we're able to kind of fortify that and build on that using editors and an editorial process. But on the receptor side, now we have multiple scholars putting their minds together to this common effort. So we've kind of we've taken that model of a translator and really changed the model altogether. ITI from the beginning, we focused on primary texts. That's the mission, and we've really tried to stay focused on that. So primary texts entail the Quran itself, which is one of our intended future goals, ahadith, and then du'as, which are also kind of a subset of ahadith. So we're not going to work on works of scholars, right? So we're not going to take, for instance, Al-Mizan or some other great works that our scholars have done. That's not within our scope. Our scope is to go back to the primary texts themselves and then work on translating those with commentary. So far we've Al-Kafi has been the project that we started with from day one. While that's been going on, like now we've finished the book of Intellect and Foolishness, which has been published. The book of Knowledge is in the works. So like we're at the last stages of the editing process on the English side. The book of Kitab al-Tawheed, the book of God and His attributes, that's in the works as well. So the Arabic, we're still working on the Arabic commentary of that. So those are all works in progress. We have done kind of between the cracks, as that work was being done, we've since it's kind of an assembly line process, there are times when one person gets ahead of the rest of the group, and so we filled in that time with An-Nudba. So we wrote a commentary and translation of An-Nudba. We've done Ziyarat Ashura as well, which is done in Arabic. Now the English is, I'm working on the English now. Dua Kumail is also in progress, so one level of research has taken place on that. So there are multiple projects that are in the pipeline. We have a dream to work on the Quran in the same way, because now we have this methodology, we have the whole team set up. It's a great model. If we can kind of expand on that and add more people, then we can kind of multiply that model into different and diversify in terms of which text we approach. So the Quran is something that's also very much needed. The translations we have all the same deficiencies that I mentioned for hadith, and we can definitely I think produce a translation that will do a much better job at communicating the original intent. From day one, technology has been really important to our work, mainly because of the distance between myself and the rest of the team. So the team of researchers are all in Iran itself, and then of course I'm over here in America. And so the only way, and I knew I was going to come back here even when I started. So we had to figure out a way to be able to work across the ocean. I remember one of the, that's one of the problems that was there. The other issue is that there are now a lot of technological tools for Islamic research, and so we wanted to make sure that we benefited from that. The challenge from day one was that the scholars I was dealing with, my teachers, they were not technologically savvy. Right at that time, computers were certainly there are plenty of people who are technologically savvy in the Hawza and in Iran, but these particular people weren't. And just to illustrate that, the first day I set up computers and everything for each of the researchers. The first day I was showing them how to start working using that computer. So I asked Shaykh Hairi to go ahead and turn it on, and he said how. he had no idea how, even where the on switch was for the computer. I won't mind me saying that, because where he ended up, seeing the problem, I hired a computer teacher to come in and just for a couple of weeks to train them and just teach them the basics of how to use Windows and how to turn on your computer and stuff like that. Within about a year, Shaykh Hairi stopped using books. Now he's really quick, and really he's really been able to kind of squeeze all the software for all it's worth, and he finds I don't know, any question we have, whenever we need a source, or we need we have some question, we're find some grammarian who has said something that will justify this particular position, or what does this particular usage mean, how is it used in other hadith, or anything like that. He's really proficient at figuring all that stuff out, but it was a process. Now he's at the point, he said we can take all the sell all the books that we have in the library there. Because they've become defunct, or obsolete, I should say. They've become obsolete, just because the software contains so much more than a limited library can. So we've used technology in terms of the software. So that we have software that's kind of specializes in the various fields of Islamic studies, and they're not only are the text of those books there, but then you have search capabilities as well that really make it easy. One example, for instance, so one of the challenges we have is that a lot of the dictionaries that are written for the Arabic language, they were written by Sunnis who were, of course, only looking at Sunni texts. And so in addition to the Quran, they were looking at Sunni collections of ahadith and writing a dictionary that was geared towards solving the problems of those ahadith. So they didn't look to the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt, which are so many more. We have so many more ahadith from the Ahlul Bayt than we do directly from the Prophet through Sunni sources. And so many times we've come across words or particular derivatives of words or usages of words that are not covered by the existing dictionaries. And so we've actually started creating our own kind of sub-dictionary, where the way we'll take that word, we'll search all the different forms of that word in all of our hadith, and we'll see how the imams themselves have used that word, in what context, and through kind of an inductive process, we'll figure out what the word means and how they're using it, and then we'll write our own definition and then use that subsequently wherever we see that word. So we've actually created a short list of words like that. And that wouldn't be possible, or at least not in any sort of efficient, easy way without computers. And then there's just the the issue of distance that we have to cover as well. So we work in real time. On a daily basis, we'll sit down for 4 hours, and so we have to coordinate the time zones and stuff like that. And we'll use just the free software that's available. That also poses a challenge. And we use Skype and these sorts of things. In recent years, because the relations between Iran and America have deteriorated, periodically Iran will come in and censor these free, the free software, Skype, and these sorts of things. And so it's kind of a cat and mouse game where we're trying to we have all the different accounts on all the different kinds of VoIP software. And we'll just have to see what works that day. So we'll have Skype and Uvu and Yahoo and like all the different kinds of messengers open, and whatever works that will work for a couple of months perfectly, and then all of a sudden they shut it down. So we have to switch to another one. So far we've kept ahead of the game. At most, like last week, for instance, the political situation got really bad, and they shut down everything. The government came in, the Iranian government came and shut down the whole internet for the country. So for 1 week we were out of business. But then we were able to, things started up again, and we found another piece of software that worked. So we use those for voice chat, and then we share screens through TeamViewer and these sorts of things, and that way we're able to work in real time, have our discussions, see the same document. I type up the Arabic commentary. And yeah, without technology, it wouldn't be possible.